Today I'm continuing to read from the story of classic crime in 100 books by Martin Edwards. Chapter 6: Serpents in Eden. British crime writers have long recognized the potential of their green and apparently pleasant land as a backdrop for crime and mystery. Wilkie Collins's The Moonstone (1868) makes superbly atmospheric use of a country house setting, as well as an eerie rural locale. The Verrinder's family seat in Yorkshire is close to the mysterious and dangerous Shivering Sands. In Conan Doyle's The Copper Beeches, Sherlock Holmes tells Watson, "It is my belief, Watson, founded upon my experience, that the lowest and vilest alleys in London do not present a more dreadful record of sin than does the smiling and beautiful countryside. Think of the deeds of hellish cruelty, the hidden wickedness which may go on year in year out in such places, and none the wiser. The rural idyll exerted a powerful appeal, not least for those who lived in towns and cities, although detectives escaping to the country or seaside in the hope of a little peace and quiet seldom found much respite from murder." In Christie's The Murder of Roger Ackroyd (1926), Hercule Poirot's retirement to King's Abbot to grow vegetable marrows proved short-lived. The story is narrated by the village doctor, as is Carter Dixon's She Died a Lady (1943), set in wartime Devon, where a scandalous liaison between a married woman and a young actor leads to an apparent suicide pact. Sir Henry Merivale, conveniently convalescing in the vicinity, is on hand to solve an ingenious mystery. Milward Kennedy was a leading exponent of the village mystery. In The Murderer of Sleep (1932), a mysterious stranger rowing along the river experiences a shocking introduction to a seemingly idyllic village, encountering the Vicar of Sleep sitting under a weeping willow beside his own churchyard, strangled. In Poison in the Parish (1935), the exhumed corpse of an elderly woman reveals that she was poisoned by arsenic. The book opens with a prologue or epilogue which reveals the final act in the drama. Both murder motive and final twist are unusual and pleasing. Among the deeds of hellish cruelty which became familiar elements in detective stories set in rural Britain was an outbreak of poison pen letters. The neat plot of The Moving Finger (1942), a Miss Marple story set in a small market town, illustrates Christie's ability to exploit stereotypes about gender for the purpose of mystification. Poison pen letters also featured in Carter Dixon's Night at the Mocking Widow (1950), Edmund Crispin's The Long Divorce (1951), and Poison in the Pen (1955) by Patricia Wentworth, which all appeared during the 50s. Yet the three books belong in spirit to the Golden Age, when the faintest whiff of scandal could destroy a cherished reputation and lead to social ostracism. The church stood at the heart of rural life, and a curate called Roger Cartwright assists in solving the murder of a village squire's unpopular wife in The Bolt (1929) by P. R. Shore, which the publisher, Methuen, equipped with an attractive end papers map of Ringshall village and its neighborhood. Cartwright's fellow amateur sleuth is the narrator, Marion Leslie, who is almost a younger version of Miss Marple. Shore was a pseudonym of Helen Madeline Lees, who wrote several books of Eleanor Scott, but only one other detective novel, The Death Film (1932). Members of the clergy served as victims, suspects, detectives, and sometimes as detective novelists with a taste for crime in rural settings. James Reginald Spittle wrote 3 novels as James Quince, including Casual Slaughters (1935), which starts and ends with a meeting of the parochial church council. John Ferguson was a railway clerk who metamorphosed into a clergyman. His ministry took him to Guernsey. The setting for Death Comes to Perigord (1931), Cyril Argentine Allington, a royal chaplain who became Dean of Durham, produced a handful of detective novels, including Crime on the Kennet. Canon Victor L. Whitechurch used a village pageant as a backdrop in Murder at the Pageant, while in Father Ronald Knox's first detective novel, The Viaduct Murder, 1925, a golfing foursome stumble across a body lying close to the fairway. Golf and murder coincided regularly in the novels of Herbert Adams. Adams's titles played relentless variations on his favorite theme: The Body in the Bunker, 1935, Death Off the Fairway, 1936, and The 19th Hole Mystery, 1939. Death is No Sportsman, 1938, by Cyril Hare, is an angling mystery, as are Ngaio Marsh's Scales of Justice, 1935, and Bleeding Hooks, 1940, by the less celebrated Harriet Rutland, a pen name used by Olive Shinwell for 3 quietly accomplished detective novels. Shooting parties provided rather more obvious opportunities for homicide, and featured in novels such as J. Connington's The Ha-Ha Case, 1934, Henry Wade's The High Sheriff, 1937, and John Ferguson's The Grousemore Mystery, 1934, a low-key impossible crime story. Like Ferguson's novel Cecil M. Wills's Defeat of a Detective, 1936, in which the identification of firearms is central to the plot, was set in rural Scotland. The book had end papers decorated with an attractive map of Craigalock Forest, supposedly drawn by ex-detective Inspector Boscobel. In Yanthe Gerald's Dead Man's Quarry, 1930, a cycling holiday is rudely interrupted by the discovery of Sir Charles Price's body in a quarry in the Welsh borders. Luckily, John Christmas, a rich dilettante with a penchant for solving mysteries, is also vacationing in the area, as was a habit of Golden Age detectives. Christmas loves comparing himself to fellow sleuths, insisting all great detectives have simple rural tastes. Sherlock Holmes kept bees, Sergeant Cuff grew roses. I, when I retire, shall cultivate the simple aster. Even the humble walking tour was fraught with danger, as Harriet Vane, discovered in Dorothy L. Sayers' Have His Carcass. While striding around the southwest coast of England, she comes across the body of a murder victim. The book was published in 1932, the same year as The Mass Trespass at Kinderscout in Derbyshire. This was arguably one of the most successful instances of civil disobedience in British history, reflecting the anger and impatience of those committed to the right to roam, and their hostility towards restrictions imposed by landowners. Such tensions spill into violence in Death in a Little Town, 1935, by R.C. Woodthorpe. In the first chapter, local people take direct action to tear down a fence erected by landowner Douglas Bonar to block a public right of way. Bonar is soon found dead, apparently battered to death with a spade, a suitably bucolic end for a deeply unpleasant character. Ultimately, the culprit escapes the gallows, an outcome that is surprisingly common in Golden Age novels, despite the frequently made claim that the books are devoted to seeing the restoration of order to a society disrupted by murder. Woodthorpe, like Christie, Berkeley, and many other writers of the period, was well aware that sometimes the legal system was an inadequate means of delivering a true justice. Living in rural Britain between the wars was often stressful. Mass employment caused many men without a job to roam the countryside. Scavenging to survive, they cropped up in detective stories as passing tramps, often suspected of crime but almost invariably proving to be innocent. Their main function was to act as red herrings. Woodthorpe, skilled at social comedy, presented an appealing intellectual tramp in The Shadow on the Downs, 1935, which again features a murder connected to the disturbance of rural life, this time the construction of a racetrack on the Sussex Downs. The charm of Golden Age novels prompted W. H. Auden to confess in his essay, The Guilty Vicarage, that he found it very difficult to read a detective story that is not set in rural England. Auden argued that nature should reflect its human inhabitants, that is, it should be the great good place. For the more Eden-like it is, the greater the contradiction of murder, the country is preferable to the town. A generation later, Colin Watson, a crime writer rather less in sympathy with Golden Age fiction, coined the term Mayhem Parva to convey a typical setting for traditional detective mysteries. A village that had an inn with reasonable accommodation for itinerant detectives, a village institute, a library, and shops, including a chemist's, whose weed killer and hair dye might be conveniently bought. There would be a good bus service for the keeping of suspicious appointments in the nearby town. For Watson, Mayhem Parva was a mythical kingdom derived in part from the ways and values of society that had begun to fade away from the very moment of the shots at Sarajevo. In modern times, writers as diverse as W. G. Burleigh, Cornwall, Anne Cleeves, Northumberland and Shetland, and Reginald Hill, Yorkshire and Cumbria, among others, have made excellent use of rural backgrounds, successfully integrating those settings with their plots. Their work has reached large audiences when adapted for television, while achieving a level of realism seldom found in the Golden Age. In contrast, the body count in ITV's Midsummer Murders may have reached absurdly high levels over the course of 100 episodes. But at the time of writing, there is no sign that the public appetite for the series is sated. The appeal of crime fiction set in the British countryside endures. The Secret of High Eldersham by Miles Burton, 1930. The sinister side of life in remote East Anglia is evoked in the second novel to appear under the name of Miles Burton. High Eldersham is a creepy place, saturated with a local legend. Late one night, the village constable drops in at the Rose and Crown, only to discover that the landlord, Samuel Whitehead, formerly a sergeant in the Metropolitan Police, has been stabbed to death. The chief constable promptly calls in Scotland Yard, but Detective Inspector Young finds himself surrounded by impalpable forces beyond his power to combat. After a promising early lead peters out, Young struggles to make headway with his investigation and consults his friend, the wealthy and affable Desmond Marion. Badly wounded during the war, Marion had transferred to naval intelligence, becoming a living encyclopedia upon all manner of obscure subjects which the ordinary person knew nothing about. On arriving in the village, Marion encounters a wartime acquaintance who hopes to marry the daughter of the local squire, Sir William Overton. Marion's eye is also caught by Mavis Overton, who is as attractive as she is adventure-loving, but as he digs deeper into the mystery, he cannot help wondering if Mavis and her father are implicated in the strange and secretive goings-on in High Eldersham. The story, also known as The Mystery of High Eldersham, combines a relatively straightforward detective plot with thrillerish ingredients, but represents a considerable advance on the first Miles Burton book, The Hardware Diamonds Mystery, published earlier in the same year. Jacques Burzon and Wendell Hurdig Taylor, authors of A Catalogue of Crime, 1971, Rivid, 1989, and for many years the most high-profile enthusiasts of traditional detective fiction, extolled Marion's debut as a model in its class. Today, the antics of the villagers seem tame, but Burzon and Taylor argued that Miles Burton was working in the Gothic tradition of Anne Radcliffe, author of The Mysteries of Udolpho, 1794, and was the first of the moderns to do so in the detective genre. Marion made such a favorable impression that, having married and settled down in High Eldersham of all places, he became a long-running series character, although Young was soon replaced by Inspector Arnold by his main collaborator. Exceptionally, Arnold solves a complex puzzle, a locked bathroom mystery, without Marion's assistance in Death Leaves No Card, 1939, one of the most ingenious Burton's novels. Marion's last appearance came as late as 1960, a year which saw the publication of both Legacy of Death and Death Paints a Picture. Even then, the real identity of Miles Burton remained a more closely guarded secret than that of High Eldersham. Only after the author's death did it emerge that the name was a pseudonym for Cecil John Street, better known as John Road, dozens of whose novels were set in the rural England that he loved. Street had managed to put everyone off the scent for more than 3 decades. Burton's year of birth had been stated in reference works as much later than Rhodes, while different novels bearing an identical title, Up the Garden Path, appeared under both pseudonyms at different times. Street's flair for remaining a man of mystery was underlined when it was revealed by the Golden Age expert and researcher Tony Medawar as late as 2003 that in the early 30s he had also written 4 obscure mysteries under the name Cecil Way and featuring London's most famous private detective, Christopher Perrin.